It's just so beautiful. What a sturdy little pie packet. I could take this on the go. Now it's a picnic pie. Now it's a potluck pie. It's whatever you want it to be. I'm just driving my pie car. Okay, good. Hi, I'm Erin McDowell, and welcome to today's episode of Bake It Up a Notch. I'm so excited because today we are going to be making a skillet galette with a little bit of help from my friends at Creuset. This is such a go-to technique for me because I think it sort of combines the best of two worlds. It combines the ease and reliability of a galette with the appearance of more of a single crust pie. So like a galette, it doesn't require any par baking, so it's quicker to get from oven to table, and it doesn't require any crimping. So it's a very simple, easy overall assembly and presentation. In today's episode, we're gonna talk about everything you need to know to make skillet galettes. What's the perfect crust to use? How are we gonna handle the filling? Of course, the assembly, and how to bake it just right. As always, we're gonna show you where things could go wrong and how to fix them. I can't wait to get started, so let's get baking. I love saying the next sentence that I'm gonna say. Let's talk about crust. So I've obviously talked about all different kinds of pie crust in the past on episodes of Bake It Up a Notch. So I just wanna do a little primer of what might work best when it comes to a skillet pie. You can really use your favorite pie crust anytime there's a pie recipe. If you've got a favorite, go for it. But in this case, I do really like a flaky crust, and so I have a few different options here for you. One is my pâte brisée recipe. I love this the most because it is the simplest. It's made in the food processor and it comes together really quickly, but it's reliably flaky. The other two are my extra flaky pie dough, which involves incorporating 1 or 2 folds into the dough, or my rough puff, which has 4 total folds and makes an extremely flaky dough. All of these are great, but I went ahead and baked a little sample of each so you could see kind of the difference in flakage, if you will, between all of them. On the top here, I have the crust, and they were just rolled out and cut into squares and baked as is. Down here, they were docked with a fork so that they would stay a little bit flatter. And this is kind of a cool lesson in and of itself to see kind of how that dough behaves, whether it's weighed down with something or it isn't. And the reason why that's important is the flakier the dough gets, remember, it's going to really be flaky wherever that filling isn't weighing it down. So here we've got our pâte brisée, and you can see nice flakiness. It's very tender. Ooh, and see, when I cut it open, you see lots of nice flakiness, really beautiful dough. And like I said, made in the food processor. If you struggle with pastry dough, this is a great place to start. And the one that's docked, we just have like a little bit more control. So you can see the flakes sort of lie a little bit flatter and closer together. Then we've got our extra flaky. It's extra. Look at it. It's so flaky. We've got lots of flaky layers. This is the undocked version. So if you use the extra flaky dough, this is what it's gonna be like, sort of up towards the edge where it's folded over the filling. Now this docked part is a little more what it's gonna be like down at the bottom where the crust is weighing it down a little bit. Still very flaky. And then finally, we have our friend Rough Puff, which you can see how dark it got. There's no shame in my baking game here, guys. This is so dark because it's taller, and as it got taller, these other ones are beautifully perfect brown, but this one was up closer to the heating element, so it got brown. And frankly, to me, this is actually a very delicious brown. I know some people are scared of that sort of baking color, but we can really pull this apart almost like a biscuit. It's just got flaky layers for days. Beautiful. And if I just tear it in half here, I mean, that's only half of it. I took the top half off and you see how much flake we're dealing with there. So that's amazing. And docked, obviously, it's got a little bit, again, that it's closer together. So it's a little bit more like the extra flaky when it's undocked, once it's weighed down a little bit. So any of these doughs work. All of them are gonna bake up to make a sturdy pie. All of them are gonna be able to handle a heavy amount of filling. And really, it's just kind of the preference of the pie baker. Today, I'm gonna use extra flaky dough, so you'll be able to see in our final pies what they look like. but any of these would be perfect. I'm gonna grab my dough out of the fridge and have a little snack, and then we'll get our crust ready. Whatever crust recipe you decide to use, you're going to need the amount for a double crust pie. So this isn't necessarily a double crust pie, but we're really needing a lot of dough here because we wanna make sure we not only line the base and sides of our skillet, but we want some dough to fold over to encase the filling. So just like a traditional galette. So I've got my dough here. I'm just going to start with a little bit of flour on my work surface and on my dough. Hi dough, how have you been? Looking good, looking buttery and flaky. I'm gonna roll this out to about 17 inches in diameter. And that is bigger than the skillet. A lot of times you'll hear people saying, oh, just use your baking dish to see if it's going to be big enough. But again, we wanna make sure that we have several inches left to be able to fold over at the edges. So just keep using flour as needed to roll out our dough. We don't want it to stick. And remember what I always say when it comes to rolling out dough, don't be afraid to move it around. If you are constantly moving and rotating the dough, it's so much less likely to stick, and then you can actually use less flour. So as long as we're using a combination of a little bit of movement and some flour, we'll always end up with a nice mobile dough that we can easily move. I hear a lot of people saying they struggle to roll dough round, and this is one of those times where it really doesn't matter. We're going to use those edges to fold it over, so anywhere that it's a little uneven really isn't gonna show in the end. So if you end up like, look, this side is nice and rounded and this side's got a little bit of a straight edge, it doesn't matter and it's not going to show. So save that energy for something else. Don't worry. This crust is gonna be beautiful any way we slice it. Huh? That was a good pun. We can use the pan as a reference here, and as you can see, we've got plenty of excess all the way around. So that's looking really, really good. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my rolling pin to kind of transfer my dough to the pan. Just gonna roll it up around the pin, bring my cast iron skillet over, and then I'll just use the rolling pin to gently unfurl the dough into the pan. Now, obviously it's not fully inside the pan. We wanna make sure it's making full contact with the base and the sides. Not only because we wanna make sure we've got plenty of room for filling and no air pockets, but also we really want that direct contact here. In a cast iron skillet, that's going to really help us get these beautiful brown sides and bottom. So it's so important that we actually lift up the crust here and press it down into the base of the pan. You wanna feel even the edge of the pan there. And lifting it up really helps because it breaks kind of this air pocket that has formed. So we can just lift it up and settle it in. It's like tucking the crust into a cast iron bed, which actually doesn't sound comfortable at all, but it's going to be delicious. I usually like to go around with my fingers then and make sure it's really touching all at that edge, and it's looking really good. So once we've got this dough all lined in the pan, we wanna let it chill for a little while, and we can use that time to, prep our filling, get ready for baking. So whenever you are chilling a pie crust and you haven't settled it in its final shape, it's important to cover it with some plastic wrap. It is going to dry out in the fridge if it's in there for extended periods of time and it's uncovered. All right, let's just put this on a baking sheet. I'm gonna go get a little plastic wrap blanket for this and chill it until we're ready to assemble. Let's dive into making our filling. Now, I love this filling for so many reasons. The main reason is because it has so many veggies in it. I mean, look at this huge pile of greens. This is 1 pound of greens, and you can really use any green you like here. I'm using curly kale. I'm also pairing it with leeks, which are one of my favorite ingredients. I grew up, my parents grow leeks in their garden. They are really sweet and just so wonderful. So they are really nice in this particular filling. I'm gonna start by melting a few tablespoons of butter in a large pot here. Now remember, we need a decent sized pot because we are working with a lot of greens. Once this butter melts, I'm going to add my leeks in here. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to wilt these leeks a little bit, cook them down. They really do soften really beautifully. It just takes a few minutes. A lot of times when I work with leeks, I work with them a little bit thinner. I really love when they just melt into absolutely nothing. But in this case, I really want those leeks to be present in the final pie. And not only are we pre-cooking this filling, but we are also going to bake it for a really, really long time in the oven. So it's really, really important that if you want a little bit of that veggie to kind of stay through, that we chop it a little bit thicker. So I'm gonna add those in. I love pre-cooking fillings in general, and of course I've talked about that here on Bake It Up a Notch before, but in this particular pie, it's totally necessary because we're working with a lot of moisture here. I mean, just the greens alone are gonna have so much moisture. So we really need to kind of concentrate that. We need to cook it down and we need to kind of be in control of the moisture so that we don't have a big soggy pie mess later. I'm gonna cook these over sort of medium heat until they visibly soften. And it's gonna take a few minutes. I'll give it a little salt, which will help it along its way. Okay, ooh, leek facial, I'm loving it. So after our leeks are soft, we're going to sort of make a cream sauce or bechamel sauce in the pot with the leeks. So I've got the rest of my butter. I'm gonna add that in. We need more butter to serve as kind of the basis for our roux that we're about to make. And it can be kind of tricky to make a roux with your aromatics or something already in the pot. It's really important that you add a little bit more fat, make sure it's fully melted, and then we will sprinkle our flour and then stir it as quickly as we can to make sure that everything is evenly combined and that we've got that nice smooth texture in the end. Now we just need to cook it for a minute or so while stirring constantly because we don't want it to get scorched or stuck to the bottom, but we want to make sure that we cook off some of that flour flavor. Now I'm going to add my milk. I've got milk and cream here so that we can make this a little bit rich and extra delicious. Give that a good stir. Make sure I'm really scraping the bottom. Make sure that, we're not having any bits of flour left down there. And once that's all nice and incorporated, ooh, it's looking really good, I'm gonna add the cream. Now, I like to season this. We can season it with a little bit more salt, and I also like to season it with some black pepper and also some white pepper. I love black pepper. It's actually one of my favorite flavors, but white pepper is so special. And with anything creamy, it just really pops and has this wonderful warmth. So I'm gonna add a decent amount of white pepper to this as well. So I now wanna just cook this until it gets visibly thickened. So right now I can see it's already starting to thicken, but it kind of runs off my spatula a little bit. What I wanna do is I wanna see a few bubbles. I wanna see it come to almost a simmer. That's really gonna activate that starch that's inside and it's going to help it thicken. I love how the leeks start to turn the sauce green. It's like, it'll all look green in the end because we're adding so much kale to this, but it's just so lovely to see a cream sauce like this with this like greenish hue. Oh, it's beautiful. The best part of cooking this dish is the way it smells good the whole time you're making it. So first you're cooking the filling and you get this incredible aroma. Then when it's baking in the oven, it's got like that Parmesan and the buttery crust, and it's gonna be a good day, is what it's gonna be. Okay, I think we're looking good here. It's nice and thick. I'm gonna go ahead and start adding my greens, a few handfuls at a time. I don't wanna add so many at once that I can't stir them easily to make sure. The goal is to get all of these greens coated in at least a little bit of this sauce. And as these greens cook down, they're gonna lose a lot of volume. They're gonna leach some of that moisture into the filling, and then we can keep cooking until we kind of got that desired end texture. All right, this is looking so good. Look how much volume it's lost. The kale has done some good cooking in here. It still has a ways to go, but we've got the oven for that. So I'm just gonna set these aside. I'm gonna grab a tray. I like to cool this filling down before we put it into the crust, just because we never want a piping hot filling going into a beautiful buttery crust. It can lead to soggy bottoms. It can lead to all sorts of things. It doesn't take long for this filling to cool though, and you don't have to get it ice cold. My usual trick is to just transfer it to a baking sheet. So once I've got it on my sheet here, I'm just gonna kind of spread it into an even layer, and it'll just take a few minutes to cool. It really doesn't take long at all. This is a great tip to do with any kind of pre-cooked filling. So it's great to do with fruit filling for pies, or anytime you're making anything, even if you're making like a chicken pot pie or something, you can cook your filling and then let it cool down a little bit like this before you add it to the crust. Gonna set this aside for a few minutes to cool, and then we'll be ready to assemble our pie. All right, I've got my cooled filling, my chilled crust. All we need is to assemble this pie. It couldn't be easier. And that's really one of the things that's so wonderful about a galette, is that it is so quick and easy to assemble. No crimping, just this nice encasing of the edges. But we do have a few finishing touches to bake this up a notch, of course. So we're gonna go ahead and scoop our filling into this crust. It is really just a beautiful color. And you can see already how thick this is. And then remember, it's going to bake even more. So when we're talking about sliceability, we're gonna have it here for sure. Now, as I'm putting in, what I like to do is I like to kind of press it in with my spatula just to make sure I'm removing any natural air pockets that occur and that the filling is in a tightly packed, even layer. That's also gonna help it slice the best later. We're almost done here. And as you can see, just like I mentioned before, look how that filling comes right up to the top edge of our cast iron skillet. It's perfect. And now we're gonna fold over our edges. When you're folding a galette, you kind of just wanna pick a place to start. And my advice is, if there's ever a point where you don't like it as much, like the crust is shorter or something like that, that's actually a great place to start, because then you can use some of the excess crust as you work your way around to help kind of make up for that error or that spot you don't like as much. I like the whole thing, so I'm just gonna pick a place to start, and I'm just gonna fold it over and let it rest where it may. And then wherever it kind of ends, that's where the next pleat is going to start. So here it ends, and I'm just gonna let that be the next pleat. And some are gonna be bigger than others. Some are gonna cover a little bit more of the pie. See, like this is gonna be a big one, a big pleat. Ooh. And this is kind of what we're hoping for. We're hoping that there will just be like this one place in the middle that is uncovered. And this one in particular, I really like the crust to filling ratio of having a good amount of crust on the top, because again, this is a really hearty filling. So we want that butteriness, we want that texture to help break it up. But this covers almost all of the filling without any of the fussiness of making a double crust pie, for example. Now I've got a little bit of egg wash. I'm going to start, before I egg wash the surface, I'm just gonna go under each pleat and egg wash that, because it's going to help those pleats stay in place a little bit better while they're baking, especially when you're using a flakier dough. It's going to want to unfurl in the oven. It's just gonna wanna sing and rise and be its most flaky self. So we want to help control that a little bit by just being like, no, stay where I told you to go. And the proteins in the egg are gonna help that happen. Okay, once I have all of those pleats kind of secured, now I can just egg wash the exposed crust. So anywhere that I want it to help brown. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use egg wash, but I do wanna kind of try to avoid letting any pool around between kind of where the crust ends and the side of my cast iron skillet begins. So one of the benefits of using an enamel cast iron skillet is that it's so naturally non-stick, and even when something does stick in the rare occasion, it's usually still easy to get it out of the pan, very simple to clean and re-season or anything that you need to do with it. But we still don't necessarily want that egg pooling down there where it's just gonna almost scramble or cook in the oven and really adhere to the side. So what I like to do is I like to just use the larger amount of egg wash more towards the center of the crust, and then just sort of brush outwards to that outer edge, just so I don't get any egg wash sliding down the sides of that skillet. I've got nice coverage there. Remember that these pies do have an extremely long bake time. That's actually really important. We're not par baking this at all. We're not needing to do any of that because again, we've got that great heat distribution from this skillet. But we still need a long cook time to make sure that the pastry gets cooked all the way through, especially when it's weighed down with such a heavy filling. So when we're applying our egg wash, we're wanting a little bit of sheen, we're wanting help browning in the oven. But if you're ever worried about it browning too much, or if your oven tends to run so that you always get things browner than you'd like them, you can also cover it with foil at any point during the baking process. It's just gonna help it brown a little bit slower, but you're still gonna get that beautiful crispness and that beautiful flakiness. My finishing touch. I'm just gonna take some Parmesan and really generously go all around the crust. You can go a little in the filling too, why not? But I really like it on the crust. It helps brown, it gets cheesy and crisp, it adds this little hit of salt around the edge, and it's also just fun to shower anything with Parmesan. I like to start this pie at a high temperature. In general, flaky crusts really love high heat. But this pie requires such a long bake time, we can't leave it at that high temperature the whole time. So we're gonna start at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we're gonna lower the temperature to 375 once we start to see some nice browning happening. We don't want any raw dough in this pie. Okay, into the oven she goes. One of these galettes hides a deep, dark secret in the form of a very soggy bottom. At least I think it does. We look at these galettes, both of these next to each other. They look both pretty good, but actually this one up here is too blonde and it is underbaked. And I think it's so important to show this because a lot of people are scared of burning things to a point that they don't bake things sufficiently. So when your finished pie is done, this is what it should look like. It should have a deeply dark golden brown crust. So yes, I have some parts that are a little bit lighter and more golden. I have some parts that are a really intense brown. Either way, I can be sure that this pie is done, it's fully baked, and not only is the crust brown, gonna be brown on the sides and the bottom, but also I wanna make sure that the crust is fully baked all the way through. Sometimes you get this kind of gummy line, and you can know that that is underbaked crust. And we really just want the whole thing to be flaky, delicious, tender, all of that. Another good indication that the pie is done, you can actually see it starting to pull away from the edges just a little bit. So sort of like a cake or a loaf of bread when it is done in a loaf pan, you can just see it start to kind of come away. There's this little bit of space. So this is my underbaked pie. And this is the main thing I want to talk about in today's segment of mistakes happen, because there's a few different things that can happen here. If we don't cook the filling enough, there's going to be a lot of moisture still left inside of the filling. And all that moisture has nowhere to go except to stay right inside the pie. So even though this filling looks pretty good and crisp on top, it might be kind of runny once we cut it. That is something that we obviously want to try to avoid. But also we can see these really blonde bits of crust all around here. I've got one brown piece, and that might have been enough to make some people think this pie is baked. But I'm gonna try to unmold this pie. Typically, when a pie is properly baked like this, it slides right out of the skillet. My gut instinct is that this one isn't going to, because we underbaked it a smidge. And in addition, I didn't let the filling cool before I put it into the crust. So all of these things, I basically made a perfect storm of a mistake pie here. And I think what we're gonna see is that we have some underbaked dough on the bottom, maybe even on the sides. So let's try to unmold this. Generally, we don't like to use a metal tool on a pan like this. So if you're gonna use something like a spatula, you wanna be really careful, just sliding it gently between the crust and the pan. We don't wanna touch the pan because we don't wanna scratch that beautiful enamel cast iron surface. Oh yeah, slid right out, because look at that. But this, all of this, you can see that's baked, this isn't. It's literally so wet. Okay, so let me try to turn it over. This is fearless baking here. Hoocha! Okay, So let's cut this in half. Okay, so good news, my filling isn't super runny. We've got some sliceability in the filling, but look how it's not very sturdy. See this? See how when I pull it, we've got the crust just flopping away from the filling? It shouldn't be like that. If that crust was crisp and set all the way through, and then more importantly, here, let's just massacre this. Oh my gosh, look, right where that fold is, that is completely underbaked. So that fold, because it's a thicker piece of dough there, it didn't get enough time in the oven. So that's why it's so important to really follow these guidelines of not only what it should look like, but also the total amount of time it takes. And if it's browning too fast for your liking, or you're worried about how brown it's getting, tent it in foil. That way you can keep it in the oven and make sure this doesn't happen. But we also can prevent, burning our pie crust, because no one wants a super brown burnt pie crust. And then down here, all of this is completely raw. So this is just, it's soggy. This is the definition of a soggy bottom, y'all. This is not what we want. It still looks pretty good from the top, but we know that something is hiding underneath. So this is what we are trying to avoid. We wanna make sure we cook our filling, get some of that moisture out. We wanna make sure that we bake sufficiently, and we wanna make sure that we let that filling cool before we put it in. That way we're gonna end up with a golden brown, perfectly crisp pie every single time. Oh my gosh, look at this skillet galette. It is so, so beautiful. I think honestly, at this point, taking it out of the oven, it was so triumphant in the Le Creuset flame skillet. It just looks especially like all of that golden brown colors. It just brings them out. Let's pop this out. Let's do the sturdy pie challenge. Ah, oh my gosh. Ah, this never gets old. So I'm gonna give this a slice. You can hear the crunch. You can hear all that flakiness. That is a beautiful slice. Okay, what I love about this is the greens and the leeks are so creamy inside, but then we also have that additional crispy layer of this flaky pastry dough. And as you can see, we can see all those flaky layers. This is perfectly baked and so ready for me to chow down. So because it's past the sturdy pie challenge, we know I can eat it like it's a slice of pizza, and I intend to. It's got such a hearty filling, but it's so creamy at the same time. Some of the kale on the top has gotten crispy, and then all those leeks throughout are just so sweet and really take the flavor up a level. And then of course, I'm never mad when something is wrapped in a buttery, flaky crust. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of Bake It Up a Notch, where we talked all things skillet galettes. I really hope that you're inspired by this and take this technique into your kitchen, because I really think it makes such an incredible, delicious galette, and I really want everyone to try it for themselves at home and see just how easy it is. As always, all of the recipes we used in today's episode are linked in the video description below. So get into your kitchen, and until next time, happy baking.